Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and thank you very much, Professor Aslam, for the kind introduction and for the invitation to speak with our friends and the Malaysian or Southeast Asian audience, where I have many friends that I really cherish the friendship and the memory I have for my considerable stay in Malaysia, 7 years. I never stayed in any place throughout my life more than 7 years, except here in Qatar. I have been here, as you rightly said, since 2011. And it has been very productive years because throughout my life, I have always had some administrative responsibilities, but not in Malaysia, alhamdulillah, not in Qatar now. So you're right, the trajectory, the Islam and the Trajectory of Globalization is my latest book. And there is a book that will come out by the end of the year by Roman and Littlefield, titled, which has a closer connection with the last book. It's titled Islam and Global Justice. That's an edited book. I have 2 chapters in that book, but I have a very learned colleagues who also joined to address this important issue. So with this, I would like to then say a few things today that give some justice to the title, that relate Islamic ethics with, as the foundation, as the root of public ethics, as we know it today, or at least as it has been developed in early phases of modern society. So the ethics that modern people think they are the right ethics they care about with regard to public responsibility and public duties and the public sphere, these are really grounded very firmly within the Tawhidic worldview, meaning in the monotheistic traditions, but more so in Islam, because Islam differs than previous traditions in many things, but most notably in the fact that because Prophet Mohamed ﷺ was the seal of prophets, then intellectuals took over the responsibility of trying to promote the good and to ensure that the public is subject to the very principles that revealed in the monotheistic tradition. And so I have put few notes here. I would like to pick on them. I will start by talking about, which is the appropriate introduction to the topic, the crisis of modern ethics. Because the world today is really facing a serious crisis all over the place, Muslim societies and Western societies, and I guess, Eastern societies. So everybody is really going through a period where we start to see the erosion of the ethical foundation of even the public institutions that for a while had some good grounding. That is disappearing. And the reason for that is that public ethics, as I said, are really grounded in transcendental ethics. And transcendental ethics have been on the receiving side of critique and rejection that dates back really to the 19th century. That's where the war started, but the full-fledged consequences of that war on transcendental ethics, we start to see it in the last couple of decades. Of course, Muslims are not in a better position because while Muslims still cherish those ethical principles, but we have not been able to develop the ideas for translating them from being universal principles to particular relationships and institutions. And on the top of that, our schools, by and large, don't want to really generalize. I'm going to generalize, but doesn't mean that I think that everybody is subject to this generalization. But it says that that's the overall trend. So even our schools, religious schools, don't teach Islam. They are taught as like personal ethics, how to be good to your parents, to your neighbors, to your teachers, but the public sphere is completely ignored. And what do we owe to our societies at large as individuals has been left out. So there is a good reason really to talk about the roots, because to resuscitate or to recover what has been dismissed for long requires a proper understanding of the past. Where did these ethical principles we call public ethics originated? I would say there is a problem with understanding the roots of those ethics that have to do with the Eurocentric view of the world. Because in Europe, which is really the ground of what we call modern today, although that ground is shifting, but still, I mean, it's still a big size of the ground on which modern institutions stand come from Western modernity. So this Western modernity was so particular to try to ground those ethics in the Enlightenment or in pure rationalism, which is, I would call it self-delusion. Somebody want to create a misconception of the past for whatever reasons, including maybe Eurocentric reasons. Europe didn't want to acknowledge any debt to people outside Europe. And that's really something that's coming back to haunt Europe, because when you distort the past, when you distort the truth, and you are living now in a bubble, in a bubble you created yourself, then your ability to go out of that bubble will become so much, diminished, that you are trapped now. You are trapped in the bubble you have created. So I think this is one thing that we notice. So modern scholarship always referred to the root of public ethics, to in the first place to the Enlightenment, and in the second place to the Greek heritage of Europe. And I think Europe is wrong, and modern scholarship is wrong on these two grounds. So we have twofold denial. Denial that the ground of public ethics are in transcendental ethics, which is the Tawheed ethics, and denial that the root of public ethics is in the Islamic civilization, Islamic societies, particularly in the work of rational idealism, which is really a term that I use to refer to Islamic rationalism that emerged within, first in the Mu'tazilite school, and then later through the work of Al-Ash'ari in the Ash'arite school, that really tried to synthesize something from the Sunnah doctrines and from the Mu'tazili methodology. Okay, with this introduction, let me move to talk about a bit to try to show, first of all, that despite the fact that Europe continues even today to root itself in the Greek knowledge, it is really sort of a delusion. I think modern Europe did not emerge because it learned of the Greek sciences, quote unquote. In fact, that's another subject. I don't want to really enter into it because it's a broad subject, but I have written elsewhere that Greeks have never developed science. They developed what we call natural philosophy, but not science, not the science that uses scientific methodology. And that scientific methodology was developed by Muslim scholars and was articulated very vividly in the work of Ibn al-Haytham, whose work was translated in the 12th century by an Italian student of the Muslim scholarship who spent about 50 years in Andalusia. His name is Gerard Cremonio. And spent 50 years. He came back with 60 books he translated from Arabic to Latin, and including the work of Ibn al-Haytham. And that's 200 years before Roger Bacon introduced the scientific knowledge, which really was translated from the work of Muslim scholars. And he himself acknowledged debt to what he called the Arabic civilization. But those who followed his steps eventually tried to deny any connection and then tried to link modern Western scholarship and science to the Greeks. So let us understand, first of all, what kind of ethics did the Greek embrace? Their ethics is what we call today the ethics of virtue. So they have really promoted 4 virtues. For example, Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics, he has talked about those 4 virtues. They are also could be found in Plato in some modified way. And these are wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, maybe self-discipline, to use like more modern term. So he said that these are the 4 virtues that people should have to have a successful life, and for him, success is to have happiness. Now, when you think about those virtues have nothing to do with ethics as we know it today. Absolutely not. Virtus, the word virtus in Latin means manliness, to be a man. And to be a man, you need those 4 virtues. And we all agree, even today, to be a man, you need to have these 4 virtues. And to be also a good woman as well, you have to have those virtues. But those have been historically associated with the duties of men. You have to be courageous to fight and to protect the city-state in Greek traditions. They have to have some wisdom so that they can really continue to have self-respect and respect of others. So in other words, those virtues are virtues that are worthy of noble people, of the aristocracy. And maybe those of you or of us who have studied Greek philosophy, they know that all Greek philosophers were very much attached to aristocracy, not to democracy. They never liked democracy. They thought democracy was a miserable, system. But for the Greek, wisdom does not recognize equal dignity. And I guess probably we all should really realize that at the heart of wisdom is to recognize equality of human beings, that people are equal. They have equal dignity. And of course, in Islam, it's a condition to be a good Muslim, to have strong faith. Because if you don't recognize equal dignity of people, then you have arrogance. And we know how Islam and monotheistic tradition have been critical of arrogance. Arrogance is really the character of Iblis, of a shaitan. And it's the first sin of any person can have, because through arrogance, you can commit a lot of sins that they will follow naturally from being arrogant person. So again, courage for the Greek does not have an important ingredients of what we think today as modern people as central to courage, which is to speak truth to power. At the top of courage within the monotheistic tradition has always been speaking truth to power, but it is not in the Greek ethics. In fact, one of the most virtuous, if you want, people of Greek, that is Socrates, who is the father of the rationalist Greek philosophy, or what Al-Ghazali called al-falsafa al-ilahiyya, you know, that the philosophy that was centered around the concept of God. The one who was really the father of this philosophy, Socrates, was executed by Greek, and he was accused of promoting, of corrupting the youth. I mean, the charge against him that he corrupted the youth. Honestly, I tried to understand what was really exactly in the content of that charge. What was the evidence for that charge? I could not. And I read even some of the writings about the trial, his trial. Plato wrote about it, but even Plato did not have the courage to tell us what kind of corruption he was accused of. And to be honest with you, I mean, this corruption has to do, in my view, I don't have the evidence yet, but I have some what was you call this, indirect evidence? Circumstantial evidence, I should say. The circumstantial evidence tells us that there's a likelihood that Socrates have been influenced by some of the Hebrew prophets. For example, we know that Elijah visited the Greek, and he taught in Greek for a while. That could be, but I'm not going to make it like a theory here, but just to share with you why those virtues are really not the virtues that we care about today, except as something particular for people who we want them to be like in leadership and charge, as individual virtues, but not as public ethics or ethics that is good for the entire society. If you look at justice, you know, the Greek justice is unequal justice. The Greek never believed that every human being should be treated according to one standard of justice. That is never there. And again, in my to be published work, the book that will come by the end of this year, Islam and the global justice, I have one chapter entitled Islam and the Universalization of Justice. And I really took Greek philosophers writing on justice to the minute details to show that they never believed that everybody should be treated equally, that a noble person cannot be like, is not the equal of let's say an artisan. So you cannot equalize with them. And not talking about slave, but artisan, meaning like a professional who provides some services in Greece. And of course, we all know about Plato hierarchical order, the guardian, the auxiliaries, and the partisans as the three stratas. And funny, because Plato suggested that to convince people in those three stratas who are permanent stratas. It's like the Hindu castes, exactly. So you are born and you die in the same caste. You have no opportunity of changing your status. So he suggested that to convince, the people of the need for this strata, he said, let us use a noble lie, a beneficent lie. And this lie is to tell the youth, the young people, that those who belong to the guardian class, their blood is mixed with the gold, and those who belong to the auxiliary, which is really the fighter and the warriors, their soul is, their blood is mixed with silver. And then this last strata, the lower strata, we tell them that their blood is mixed with brass or iron. Okay, so that's really what we have when we look carefully about the Greek philosophy or ethics. But even modern scholars, when they start teaching ethics, they start with the Greek and they jump immediately to the late Middle Ages, which is, modern times, to the Enlightenment. So you have Enlightenment and you have the Greek, and between there's this gap, big gap, this big hole that has not been filled with anything other than saying, well, humanity was, sleeping and not doing anything. And so then Enlightenment came and now humanity awakened. Not Europe, but humanity. All right, so then I would like to talk about how ethics of dignity as opposed to ethics of virtue. So we have ethics of virtue. It's about wisdom, courage, is about wisdom, courage, justice among equals, and temperance. On the other side, we have within the monotheistic ethics four important principles that really, there are more, but these are really very cardinal principles. You have equal dignity, you have social accountability, you have universal justice. Everybody, even your enemy, are entitled to justice. That's what Islam has taught. And accountability. Accountability of holders of public ethics. These are accountable. They are not like they are nobles, so we cannot really touch them, or we have to treat them differently. So that takes me to how these monotheistic worldview has been manifested in modern scholarship. It is really part of what we call today the Germanic Idealism. This Germanic Idealism started with Kant and ended with Hegel. And then you have Fichte and Schelling as like middle philosophers within that tradition. This really tradition has tried to translate Islamic rationalism into modern European thought. So when we read Kant, we find that his attempt to establish a theistic sort of values summarized in the categorical imperative that you have to treat everyone else in a way that the rule or the principle that guide your action can be used as a universal principle, which is really, this is exactly what Islam has always emphasized in terms of that there is no difference between people on the basis of race or ethnicity or anything else, but their righteousness, their ability to contribute positively to their society and their community, meaning to have to uphold the transcendental values. And indeed, Germanic idealism have held up to transcendental ethics. And they have insisted on those ethics to the extent that today, when you talk about Kantian morality or ethics, we talk about the ethics of duty, not the ethics of virtue, or they sometimes call it the ontological ethics, which is exactly what Islamic rationalists have taught. In fact, many of the arguments you find in the work of Kant really can be traced back to Islamic rationalism and to Islam. And so we can find the same thing with other German idealists who have tremendous influence on modern thinking. Like if you take these two figures, Kant and Hegel, probably these are the two most influential thinkers in the history of modern West. and of modernity till now, because Muslims are yet to produce scholars and philosophers who have universal impact and influence that can rival some of those thinkers. I pray. I'm not only hopeful, but I have certainly the confidence that that will happen. That will happen. But so far we have not. And we started to see the beginning of it, but it will take time. Today, definitely, if you read in Western scientific writing and scholarly writing, then many Muslim scholars, their names pop up, and you could feel that they have made some impact to counter some of this positivistic, materialistic view of the world that has triumphed today. So Western idealism is dead, has been dead for a while. Probably it has been dead since Nietzsche wrote his work, in which really Nietzsche has his work encapsulate a big chunk of modern philosophy, which is putting power at the top. Power is the only important things for us. And in fact, good and evil, as he argued, are subcategories of power. So you have power, and then whatever the powerful say this is good, it will be good. Whatever the powerful say this is bad or evil, it will be evil. Which is definitely, those who live in the West can testify today, is that the powerful, the oligarchs today in Europe and the United States are trying to dictate a new ethical principles, even socially. So they are saying the family is no more, is not good. And I'm sure that Plato would be happy with that. Marx would be happy with that. And they are saying that, well, there's hundreds of genders, Genders are not a natural category, but it's a choice of people. But again, that's another discussion. But what I wanted to say here is that through Kant, we can find the influence of Islamic rationalism. Now, I don't want to labor over this point, but I would like at this point to talk about, let me quote here Nietzsche, because this is, I don't know, probably very few Muslim universities teach Western philosophy at depth. But Nietzsche, he says, this is a quote, "There's no good and evil, but power, and those too weak to seek it." So if you have good and evil, you're most likely to be evil that's grounded in something other than power. Then you are most likely a weak person, unable to obtain power, and therefore you are trying to find refuge in something that is beyond you, which is, of course, a big lie. But here I would like really to link what I called public ethics with first of all with the monotheistic tradition that is rooted, of course, in the act of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, and his most memorable act that most people know Ibrahim by this act, which is speaking truth to power. The act of Ibrahim, the first act that made Ibrahim known, alayhi salam, was to speak truth to power. That to go public and say, well, those idols are man-made, they are the handiwork of men, and it will be foolish to worship them. Now, I'm sure that many people during his time probably thought that the same thing, but they didn't have the courage to speak truth to power, because the cost of that is your life. Paganist societies never tolerated, they would tolerate a lot of things, but would not tolerate to challenge the foundation of their religious traditions. And the hit will come from the state directly, not from the people. The state will interfere if you try to challenge that, because that religion was essential for the king to rule without accountability. because the king was considered like divine, like he is the descendant of the founder of the city who was divine, and therefore his will becomes the law. So we have speaking truth to power, or if you want to put it differently, placing truth above power. So power has value which is secondary to truth. The highest truth, the highest value in society should be truth. Should be truth, number one, and then power will have to be subordinated to truth. But that was not the case in the pagan society. And believe it or not, it is not the case in many circles in modern society, particularly in international relations. International relations scholars say what happened, exactly like Nietzsche. They say is what is important is power. Ethics should not really, you can have ethics, but after you establish power. But you cannot bring ethics to regulate the act of power. That is really the essence of the most influential school in international relations. Every school of international relations teach that particular look at the world and consider it the most authoritative. It is political realism. Political realism, which is really realpolitik to you. I mean, that's used by all empires in the past. So the legacy of speaking truth to power has to do with the Abrahamic faith, with the Abrahamic act of saying, well, I have responsibility. I can't see distortion around me and close my eyes and my ears as many people around him. The Torah talks about conversation between Ibrahim alayhi salam and his father, in which Ibrahim asked his father, who was really who was serving, those idols and moving them and cleaning them. He told him, why do you worship those idols? And you have made them, you move them around. Do you think that these are divine? He said, no, I don't think. But if I would tell the truth, they will kill me. That happened before, of course, Ibrahim went ahead and spoke the truth. Now, what was remarkable also in terms of the Abrahamic tradition that came later, beginning with Musa alayhi salam, is that when Musa took the Israelites out of Egypt, their servitude in Egypt, to Sinai, and then eventually they were called to enter into covenant, that covenant with Allah. So that covenant, think about it this way, of course, it might sound today like very normal, but given the time that throughout the Near East and beyond, throughout the world, laws was the will of the ruler. He cannot be questioned about it, and nor can be questioned those who are implementing the will of the ruler. And so people have to submit to the ruler as the source of law. Now, in Sinai, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala entered into covenant with the children of Israel, not with Moses alayhi salam. He entered into covenant to uphold the law, the Mosaic law, with the people. And so what that meant, it meant that after the passage of Musa alayhi salam, everyone in the community, including prophets and kings, were subordinate to the law. So law was above everybody. And everyone in the community could refer to that law to challenge the authority of the king. And that's what really happened throughout the history of Rusul Bani Israel. The Hebrew prophets, all of them, from Amos and Elijah all the way to Isa alayhi salam, and before him directly Yahya alayhi salam, all of them came to speak truth to power, to reform the community, to tell the truth. And they spoke truth to power to the king cult. And the king cult included the high rabbi, the high, well, he used to be called the high priest, not high rabbi. But I mean, he is like a chief rabbi. And he was really, what he was doing, and of course it's familiar to us today in this modern time, he was trying to bend the law of Musa, the revealed law of Allah, to bend it to serve the interests of the king. And so Hebrew prophets, all of them were reformers, came to really bring back the true covenant and to speak out against the distortions and the sins and the mischievous done by the king and his religious establishment and those who followed their steps. So the idea today was that we say everybody under the law. It is rooted in the Tawhidi tradition. Pagans would never have said that. Pagans always believe that the law is the law of the king, and he is divine, and we have all to listen to whatever he says, even to his whims. You know, we have to live up. We can't challenge those inaccurate laws or unjust laws that he might promote. Let me move on really to bring other evidence to show where we find the roots of public ethics. And I would like here to recall something from Hegel. As you know, Hegel was within the Germanic Ethics, but he is so influential even today. I mean, in Western universities, Hegel is influential, and his influence is not among like liberals, but among Marxists or those leftists, because Marx have borrowed his system of logic and his system of describing the how society evolved. But of course, he brought his materialist view into the German idealism, which was, of course, refuted by Marx. So in his important work, Philosophy of History, Hegel, first of all, acknowledged that secular power before Islam was subject to the practices of brutality and of capricious decisions by the rulers. So, for example, in Rome was using brutal force to subdue and force people of different nations to submit to the law of the Romans, which privileged the Romans. Not that everybody was equal under the Roman law. Definitely, the Romans have a special privilege within the Pax Romana, as it's called historically. So he acknowledged that the secular order was very brutal and very capricious before Islam. He also acknowledged in that work that while Christianity rejected the brutality and capricious nature of the Roman rule initially, but then it never challenged it after it became the church of the state, the religion of the state. So that's where you hear like, give to Caesar what for Caesar and give to God what was God. This is what we find like Saint Augustine writing his two cities, the city of God, where he talked about city of God, the city of man. City of God is the church, and maybe the kingdom of God and the hereafter. City of man, we can't deal with it. We can't change it. We can't reform it. In fact, it was Islam, Islamic revelation, that subordinated power to truth. Now, before power was number one, there was truth, of course. I mean, we shouldn't deny that ancient people cared a bit about the truth, but the truth was secondary to the extent, like Plato, a philosopher, a noble person, and a respected person even today, he suggested, let us lie, let us be dishonest with our kids so that they will accept what we are telling them. So it was Islam. And here you find Hegel, acknowledging that Islam or what he called the Mohammedan principle, or the Oriental Revolution, also use those terms. He said it was the first to subordinate power to ethical judgment. Now, with the dawn of Islam, no more one can say, okay, in politics, we can use this, power is what matters, like what Machiavelli has taught in modern times even, which I believe that his teaching has been followed by many politicians today. But it was Islam that said the act of the ruler is subject to ethical judgment, cannot engage in injustice or in lies or in deception. And so Hegel says it took Christianity 8 centuries, even though Christianity came before Islam, but it took it 8th century after Islam, before it started to implement this approach, subjecting power to ethics. And of course, he was talking about the Protestant Reformation, where Christianity was reformed and where this hierarchical order of the church was rejected, particularly by the Protestant. They said, we are all priests. And they said, we have to govern ourselves according to the principle of justice. And that later flourished into the notion of equality. Of course, Protestant Reformation talked about equality of people, definitely. And even today, when you look at the political work of modern philosophers, you find that the principle of equality, no modern philosopher has been able to justify it rationally. The only rationalization or explanation of equality was provided by Locke, John Locke, and everybody today just refer to him when they talk about equality. But Locke established equality by reference to the Torah. Now, again, we need to debate it as scholars today, whether it was the Torah, the Old Testament, that promoted or prompted him to think about equality, or whether what he have received from the Muslim rational idealism, from Islamic rationalism. And just for some of the viewers who are not aware of some of the facts about history, all the works of Muslim scholars, Islamic rationalists in particular, have been translated to Latin and to other languages like German, French, and English since the 12th century. It began the translation in the 12th century. So the work of Ghazali, for example, has been translated under the title Summa Philosophica in the 12th century. He wrote it just less than a century before it was translated. And so the work of Ibn Rushd, of Al-Ghazali, of Al-Razi, of Ibn Sina, both with regard to nature and with regard to society, has been really influencing the thinking of Western scholars. And of course, they have adapted it to their own liking, but still the roots of all those principles that we find today important can be found in the work of Muslims. Let me therefore, how much time still I have to speak, Dr.?
Maybe another 5-10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay, that's good. Yeah, in fact, I spend more time in some of the segments I wanted to, because of course, it needs some expounding to make sense. But let me talk about 5 Islamic rules of public space. And let us see, how do they relate to modern society? Now, the first one is that law stands independent from executive power. Now, this principle evolved within Islamic tradition. And in modern time, a scholar like Noah Feldman has really wrote extensively on that in his work, The Fall and Rise of the Islamic State. Unfortunately, after he wrote his work, We know that there was a so-called Islamic State emerged in Iraq and Syria, which, there's a lot of question mark around it, just to make this word Islamic State sound like so unacceptable in the minds of many modern people. So this fact is so clear for us today when we go and read about the treatises written by Muslim scholars. Now, one fact we have to understand is that Sharia, or the law, Islamic law, is Sharia. And Sharia has, of course, two layers. One is it about al-ma'qul. If you read, for example, the work of Islamic rationalists, from al-Juwayni to al-Ghazali to Ibn Sina, to Ibn Rushd, to Ibn Khaldun, you find that all of them agree that the law was developed by al-fuqaha, by the jurists. Muslim jurists developed the law, and it was developed independently from the state. In fact, the beginning of evolution of Sharia as set of rules and of usul, of methods for deriving those rules, started before there was really a state in the proper sense, before the dynasties. The dynasties came after the foundation of Sharia was set, and the Sharia was really legislated by the jurists, not by the executive, not by the Sultan. The Sultan in the history of Islam never had any legislative power. Legislative power resided with the jurists who resided within Muslim civil society, not the state. In fact, even jurists were independent from the state, meaning they didn't have like a salary given by the Sultan. Their income came from civil society. It came from mainly al-waqf, or many of them were really very good traders. They have businesses, and many of them either are artsmen, craftsmen, or traders. Like we know, for example, Abu Hanifa was a very good trader. He never needed to get even money from al-waqf. But those who didn't have, a profession, but devoted themselves completely to knowledge, they received their income not from the Sultan, but from al-awqaf, al-waqf, which gave them like independence from the Sultan. He couldn't like hire them or fire them. So Sharia definitely provide limitation to the power of the Sultan. Sultan could not act outside the Sharia. Those of us who read like some of the work of, let's say, Al-Mawardi established a procedure for selecting the Khalifa by of course, by two stages. One of them is the nomination of the potential Khalifa, and then by al-bay'ah. And then he sort of accepted the legitimacy of the Sultan who came to power by force, provided he submit to the Sharia and recognize al-Khalifa. And so they have this compromise, knowing that really the optimal situation shouldn't be like that, but because of a tribal society where eventually anyone who got power was a head of a powerful clan or a tribe, then they have allowed it, but subject to the rule of law. In fact, even taxation, al-kharaj, was not decided by al-Khalifa or by a sultan. It was decided by Islamic Sharia. And some of us who are familiar with the work of Abu Yusuf, Kitab al-Kharaj, know, both in terms of the language and in terms of the determination that the Khalifa was subject to that law. And that's how he spoke to the Khalifa. The book, by the way, was a response to request by Harun Rashid that he needed to know how to implement al-Kharaj. And for that reason, Abu Yusuf wrote that book, and he gave him command. You can do this, you can do that. So that for the first principle. I guess maybe I have to rush a bit so I don't really exceed the time and allow time for discussion. So you have independent law, you have a moral responsibility in the public sphere, including speaking truth to power, which is al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy al-munkar. Unfortunately, this amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy al-munkar was not emphasized by many Sunni scholars enough. It was emphasized, but really it was not emphasized enough. They focus more on the arkan. They are important, definitely. They are the core of spiritual uplifting of the Muslims and providing some peace within the community through zakah. But of course, the Quran is full of injunctions about the need to push back against corruption, the need to speak the truth, the need to hold your ground as a moral agent on earth, as a Khalifa on earth. So you have this, then speaking truth to power. You have accountability of the holder of public office. This accountability was declared as early as the Khilafah of Abu Bakr in his inaugural address to the community after he was elected to the office of Khalifa. He said really clearly, among other things, he said, إِنِّي وَلِّيتُ عَلَيْكُمْ وَلَسْتُ بِخَيْرِكُمْ. I have been selected to rule over you, but I'm not the best of you. So it's not about like I'm the honorable person to be selected. I am one of you, but you have put the trust in me. إِنْ أَحْسَنْتُ فَأَعِينُونِ. If I do good, then give me the support, including, of course, الطاعة بالمعروف. وَإِنْ أَسَأْتُ فَقَوِّمُونِ. If I went astray, then judge me, evaluate me, put me aright. And that is really concept has been quite entrenched in the Sharia. Accountability of the holders of public office. The judge is accountable. Of course, even socially, the parents are accountable for taking care of their kids and bringing them up, according to the best moral values. And then you have this freedom of conscience and the equal protection for religious for religion in society. This is what we found first in Sahifatul Medina, where the Prophet ﷺ has set a number of rules, none of them about ibadat, of course, because it was multicultural, multi-religious society. And the Sahifa recognized that diversity and says very clearly that everybody is entitled to equal justice. The Jews, the Muslims, and in fact, when the Sahifa was implemented, there were a good number of the Khazraj and the Aus tribes who were not Muslims yet. Okay, so probably I have covered a few ground for us to. Now let me say something about the common good. Because many of us think that this common good, or what is called public interest, is a modern concept enshrined in enlightenment. No, it is an Islamic concept developed by Islamic scholars in the 3rd century of Islam. And the one who really discussed it in details is a scholar with the name of Abu Bakr al-Jassas. Al-Maslaha. Al-Maslaha as a governing principle of law, of Sharia, was elaborated in a good details by Abu Bakr al-Jassas. In fact, you don't find this concept neither among the Romans. In fact, it will not come up because there's no common interest in the mind of the Romans because people are not equal. To talk about common interest, you have to have a sense first of equal dignity of all people. And that the ruler main job is to act ethically, not act powerfully. And that was not really in the realm of the Romans, nor in the realm of the Persian dynasties. They talked about justice. Of course, among the Persian, you find this principle, al-adl asas al-mulk, that justice is the foundation of mulk, of dynasty or sovereignty, the way you wanna translate it. I would say mulk, not in the sovereignty of the king. So adl is very essential for him to not to be sort of confronting rebellions from his population. I guess in that context, not as we today try to understand it. So maslaha was, a very important principle today for governance, and it was made an important principle for governance, beginning with the Jassas, but you find later on further development in the work of the Jassas was Mu'tazili, by the way. But when Islamic rationalism moved from al-Mu'tazila to al-Ash'ira, then you find it in the work of al-Juwayni, of al-Ghazali, al-Azm bin Abd al-Salam. Al-Azm bin Abd al-Salam, maybe I should conclude with this. Al-Azm bin Abd al-Salam has written a voluminous work called Al-Qawa'id al-Kubra or Qawa'id al-Ahkam, has this two translations, two way to has been described. The book Qawa'id al-Kubra is a book in which al-maslaha has been shown to organize all the rules of Sharia. In fact, the interesting thing about Al-Azm bin Abd al-Salam, he has a very enlightening definition of Sharia. This is how he defines it. He said, "Ash-Shari'atu kulluha nasa'ih." Sharia, all of Sharia is made of advices. بِجَلْبِ الْمَصَالِحِ وَدَرْءِ الْمَفَاسِدِ, to bring what is good and to repel corruption. That's what Sharia is. And then he goes on to show in a very elaborate, very detailed, very solid work how that can translate all the rules of Sharia into a hierarchy of values and principles that can become so clear and so organized. And you see, a work like that has great influence on the work on the Western scholars, because if you look at the work itself, he hardly cites any ayah or hadith in that work, because he assumed this is, of course, work in usul, and those who are reaching the level of studying usul and kalam have already understood all the details, and he wants to give them the structure. So they are, in a very rational way, try to outline the law, the rule of the law. Something that you could find echo of it in the writings of Western scholars, as you could find like echoes of the writing of Ibn Arabi and many of the Sufi philosophical approach. Hegel, really, I mean, when you read his philosophy, it sounds like you are reading Arabi, but a few centuries later with more attention to the nature of society at the time where Hegel wrote it. I wanted to say one more thing, but I will leave it out. I will say just the title of what I wanted to say is that Islam established the first plural society, whereby people of faith, of different faith, have the full right to exercise their faith, not only to exercise it, to have freedom of consciousness, but also to organize their communities according to their principles, without being subject to the intrusion of the Muslims and imposition of the Muslims. And there is an interesting case of that in a suit that was brought by a Christian community in northern Iraq to the Khalifa, and was transferred to Mohamed bin Hassan al-Shaybani in Baghdad. This lawsuit was about a Christian community has been sort of harassed and threatened by a Muslim community because the Muslim community or village wanted them to stop raising pigs and breeding wine or brewing wine, I should say. And Muhammad Hassan Shibani received that case, and he really ruled for the Christian. He said, they have entered our peace through the Aqd Zimma, through this trust contract, and that Aqd recognized the right to follow their religion and practice it without intrusion on their faith and tradition by the Muslims. And so he ruled for them, and the village could not anymore try to stop them from brewing wine and raising pigs. So I'll conclude with this and look forward to your comments and questions.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, Louay, for a very, I think you covered an entire semester's worth of topics in this less than 1 hour. And I think I just maybe will support what Professor Abdul Aziz Barhoud said. We need you to be here to share with us in greater detail some of these ideas that you are working on, and inshallah this book that you have coming out at the end of the year, I think, will be a wonderful contribution to this. Before I move to the Q&A, I mean, just very briefly, my take on the 5 or 6 points that sum up your presentation. Modern ethics is in crisis, and the reason is its lack of recognition of transcendental ethics. Greek thought didn't really talk about public ethics. It was a very individual-based thing, a very unequal society. And even Enlightenment thought, for a variety of reasons, did not really address the core issues. Your Islamic roots for public ethics, you go back to Abrahamic tradition, but really the ideas are to be found in Islamic discourse of what you term as the Islamic rationalist school, Mu'tazili, and then later on Ash'ari views. And you talked about the 5 rules of public space, which you connected to the writings and the traditions of Islamic scholarship. And I like the last point that you mentioned, this idea of the common good, public interest, and even this entire discourse on plural society and living in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society is something that really was, could be seen in the writings of Islamic scholars. It's very sad. I think you mentioned it in the beginning of your talk. Unfortunately, today, if you look at the Muslim world, you will not, see those wonderful things in practice for a variety of reasons. I believe your writings throughout the decades have been talking about the reasons for this and what we need to do. So with those few words, I would now like to open for questions from the floor. Dr. Hamid Ali Zaroom, please just unmute and ask. Alaikum salam.
Thank you, Prof. Aslam, for inviting Prof. Safi to see him here with us, sharing with us his thought and knowledge after almost 17 or 18 years. I was so touched by the ideas he shared with us. I don't know whether Prof. Louay Safi represents both. He is a political scientist as well as a politician. If I'm not mistaken, he was the spokesperson of the Syrian opposition. So perhaps, maybe in my understanding, he has realized that some ethics are missing, and that's why he left politics and came back to academia, though he did not abandon academia when he was also a politician. My concern here is the al-hukm al-rashid or al-hukm al-rashid. Some people might think that good governance is a new idea, is a new idea that was introduced by the Westerners. But in fact, for us Muslims, al-hukm al-rashid or rashid is fundamental for us. Al-Khulafa al-Rashidun are called Rashidun because they were righteous. He mentioned the incident of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu when he said in Ra'aytumuni ala al-haq. Okay, so he was telling the people that you have the right to oppose me, or you have the right not to obey me if I go astray. But Umar radiallahu anhu precisely focused on this issue. And Umar said radiallahu anhu, in ra'aytumuni ala al-haq, okay, follow me. If not, i'wijajan faqawimuni, in ra'aytum fiya i'wijajan. And a man among the audience, a layman, a normal person, he said, Wallahi law ra'ayna fika i'wijajan laqawwamnaka bisuyufina. If we see you going astray, we will finish you, we'll change you, we'll overthrow you. So he, subhanallah, Umar radiallahu anhu was telling the people, you have the right to question me, to check me, to topple me. So how we have these ethics nowadays among our politicians, subhanallah. And so many things we mentioned. Shukran, Doctor. Thank you.
Zarun, basically you are giving your support to the
yeah.
Right. Okay. So
thank you.
Unless Louay, you want to make a response or
well, I mean, I want just to respond to one thing about my political participation. Now, this, I am really through and through, my life commitment is to Islamic scholarship. But I believe also that the one who is teaching people about principles and cannot really shy away from, living up to his responsibility when there's a need for that. Of course, I was dragged into it by my community, and I happily obliged, because I felt there was an evil regime trying to suffocate everybody, serve the masters overseas and outside the country at the expense of the misery of the people. And I tried to participate, but you're right, I realized that, well, we still need time because, our politics, the politics of the opposition is not completely different than the politics of the regime. Maybe I would like to compare them in terms of their intentions, but in terms of their, mode operandi, their operation, and the way they see politics, really, they come from the same political culture. And so that's really where the work needs to be done. And that's why I'm more now committed and realize my role. It's more important to work on this area. Maybe in the future, find different generations of Muslims in Syria, inshallah.
Thank you, Brother Louay. I think this is fascinating, your comment, because sometimes as academics, we are always reminded that we need to be objective. We shouldn't take sides, but I remember lectures in the 90s by attending lectures by Professor Latas, who used to say that you cannot not take sides. You need to speak on the side of truth, as you said, right? So in that sense, academics have a role to play, and sometimes I think it's important for us to have the courage to speak out, although sometimes it may be a problem. Okay, there is before I call Pa Habib, there is a question in the chat. Our regular participant in, I think, nearly all programs that we organize, Nuruddin from Indonesia. I will read it. Prof. Safi, currently our public spaces are not only physical but also digital. In other words, mediated by technology. How can Islamic ethics contribute to the Islamization or ethicalization of digital public spaces, including perhaps the ethicalization or Islamization of artificial intelligence? That's one. And then there's a second question on, you emphasize the erasure of the history of Islamic civilization, which contributed to the West. My question is whether the ideas of Islamic thinkers, apart from changing the perspectives of European thinkers, also experienced secularization, so that the original ideas of Islam became distorted or reduced. Your comment, Prof.
Very quickly, I think you are completely right. No set of ideas can be translated into social action without compromises. There is no exception to this case. Find it even in Islam. Islam has been compromised a bit as it tried to reconcile its values to the Near Eastern and maybe the greater Middle East, what we call today greater Middle East, but to the Nile Oxus, basin. So there were cultures already, civilizations, and remember the Arabs who carried Islam from Medina and from Hijaz and from eventually had to rely on those who embraced it from those regions, who came with all the philosophies that they had historically. And I'm working currently on another work looking at how that has happened historically and where it has happened, because if you don't understand how it has happened, where it has happened, we cannot correct it. So yeah, I mean, that's compromise always. And I had a very close friend who defined Islam. He said, Islam is like this pure crystal water in a river that takes its color from the basin that it moved through. So whatever the color of that basin will be reflected in the water. So there's something like that. Though I'm also believe that this process is dialectical, meaning action and ideas when they are implemented. I mean, ideas were implemented into actions, then they brought about another way of understanding those principles. And so there's a room for reform all the time. So yeah, I agree with you that that's a challenge. And it seems to me that that's inescapable. That's why it would be a sad thing for us to think that Islam has exhausted its power and its giving through the action of our great scholars of the past and the great Muslim of the past, which we love them, respect them, but we should believe strongly that there is a room for Islam to shine even further by becoming more true to its own principle, in increasingly becoming more intellectual, more knowledge-based, more egalitarian society. There are, of course, some people trying to take it back to the hierarchy, but I think they are going to fail. That is undoable. But I would stop there. I mean, that would be my very initial thoughts on your question.
Yeah. I mean, if I just add, I think the first part of the question, it's the digital, online social media that makes it very difficult for this hierarchy, to at least to go back to the old hierarchy. There could be new hierarchies being created through social media and so on, but definitely posing new challenges. But Habib, yes.
Thank you, Prof. Aslam. I highly appreciated this in-depth touring and also in-depth, very fast tracing of the ethics for the public ethics and responsibility by Professor Louay Safi. He traced back to the whole sort of the Greek, Roman, and European, and even he mentioned some of the German philosopher like Schilling and Hegel, said from Kant. Yeah. And also, Prof. I also mentioned about this bonum commune, the public goods, al-masalih al-amma. These are very important topics. And may I just, my humble question, whether it's just or I do justice or not, that when we talk about this transcendental ethics, the Islamic or Tawhidic ethics, I think we should talk about also this the current development of the maqasid, not only maqasid Sharia, but the whole maqasid, and also we are living after the post pandemic. The world is really changing. So how would we develop this new ethics? Because some of the Western, especially the tradition of the Geneva, others, on the global ethics by Christoph Stuckenbauer, he wrote about the new ethics on the post pandemic. Because at least we know the three schools of the global ethics: Hans Kuhn, and then the philosopher Leonard Schwedler from Temple University, and Stuckenbauer. So, what would be our the Islamic contribution to the new public ethics and responsibility post pandemic? This is my humble question to my brother, Professor Louay Safi. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Dr. Habib Kharzin, for a very important question. And there are a lot to be said. Actually, I didn't really scratch the surface of all those elements that I presented. And as Dr. Aslam rightly pointed out, that I try to provide a framework, but the depth of it is cannot be really done in one lecture, online lecture like this. But I was very keen to really outline really the issue. That's why I tried to go more horizontally than vertically. But let me address your point, which is really at the core of it. And by the way, this discussion about the intent versus the illah, the intent or al-maqsad or sabab, as the foundation for qiyas in Sharia, started in the 2nd and 3rd century of Islam. And Al-Jassas has really engaged it deeply. So did Al-Juwayni, so did Al-Baqillani before him, so did many of those. So did Abu al-Husayn al-Basri. Al-Husayn al-Basri is different than Abu Hassan al-Basri. He was really a very towering figure in Usul al-Fiqh. And the reason most of us, we don't hear about him because he was Mu'tazili. Even Al-Dhahabi and Ibn Taymiyyah have really commended his work. But this historical tension with the Mu'tazilites because of certain doctrines that they pushed has led to their fall down completely in the minds of all Muslims. And they have even been demonized further because of rivalry, etc. But you have a good point. So really, the reasons that we could understand that the purpose, the overarching purpose of Sharia is al-maslaha, maslaha al-amma wal-khassa, where Shatibi has really elaborated on this a lot. The Andalusian scholar Shatibi, who came late, probably in the 8th century of Islam, as Muslims were ready to have this journey down the hill after all that climb up. So intention or the intent, what we call today maqasid, and the illah, because initially al-fuqaha used al-illah, which is very limiting, is very limiting for trying to elaborate Sharia, to really deal with an evolving social order and political order. But that angle where we could now distinguish between al-maqasid and al-ilal, and sure, al-maqasid have an overriding power on thinking, because there's a lot to be said. Probably we need to have a special session to talk about maqasid. And as you know, this has been my passion. I have written a lot. I have written Al-Hawkama Rashida, which I don't know whether it's available to you. It's in Arabic, but it outlined really, using al-maqasid, it outlined the main structure of modern political order that is really informed by Sharia itself. So I see what you're saying. Yeah, we need to do that. We need to write on those issues. Muslim scholars must engage that topic. And they have already started, alhamdulillah. I mean, I'm very pleased to see there is a quite forward-looking approach, despite all the noise that we see from this Salafiyya jihadiyya, those people who wanted to reduce solutions to just let us, engage in fighting regardless of the conditions and the content, and that's the solution. So there are a lot who are really trying to found our future Muslim society on a good ethical, political, social, psychological grounds, which we need all those areas in order to forge ahead. Fighting doesn't really do anything other than confronting as a last resort a power that is bent on destruction, pure destruction. But it's not like the first mode of dealing with problems. So I'm glad to see that trend is now becoming more so respected in our societies, and that's where the future is.
Thank you, Brother Louay. Maybe the last question for today, it's already reached 10:30, is from Muhammad Azizan, who
Oh,
presents
mashallah.
himself. Yeah, so he says
He's a close friend, yeah, mashallah.
Yes.
We've met for a while, but we were very close. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah. The only thing is, I think his question may put you in a little bit of difficulty because
I love it because this is coming from a compassionate heart.
Assalamu alaikum, Doctor. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Lai.
please present the
Walaikum
question.
salam wa rahmatullah.
How are you? How are you, Doctor? Long time.
Good, alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah.
Alhamdulillah.
Tabarakallah. I tried to reach you many times, sir.
Yeah.
But today, alhamdulillah, Allah has granted me the very, I don't know how to say, but alhamdulillah, I could see you today and in a very, very momentous. Inshallah, please proceed, Professor.
Well, why don't you ask the question yourself? You are. Yeah, please ask your question.
Okay. I'll ask my question. Hold on. It's about the. How do you regard this Malaysia Madani? If I put it this way, can we term it as a fiqh maqasid siyasa sharia of Malaysia Madani?
Is it a question about whether current?
What is your academic view on this? I won't put it political view. It could be safe to say your academic view on fiqh maqasid siyasa sharia, if I can put it that way, Prof.
Well, I mean, probably if you read anything that I have, the last thing I published in Malaysia,
Yeah,
was a maqasid approach to political rights, something like that. That was
Okay.
published initially in the Islamic Discourse journal that is published by IIIM. And later came as a chapter of a book that was edited by our good friend, Dr. Tahir al-Nisar. So yeah, I think really that's how you have to think about morality and about legality in Islam. You have to identify the universal principle because this we have a religion that was brought as to humanity as a rahmatan lil alamin. The alamin has been from the beginning to the end of the mission of the Prophet Muhammad. Al alamin has always been part of the Quranic discourse, to the extent that, of course, we read it every day. When we read Al-Fatiha, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. You know, Allah is Rabbul Alameen. And his prophet was saying Rahmatan al Alameen. And so, and that's where Alameen is also about the universal. Alam, the whole thing, the whole, not like the particular communities, the human community. And the principle that is right to use for the entire thing is a universal principle. And Sharia is made of universal, and maqasid are universals.
Yes.
You know, maqasid, what is maqasid? When we talk about maqasid, we talk about those universal principles like justice, like compassion, like equality of a human being, like standing, you know, against corruption and speaking truth to power, helping the needy and the weak, you know, taking care of our kids and our family. So all of those are universal principles, not applied only in Malaysia or in Syria or in Egypt or in the United States, but these are come from our fitrah. أقم وجهك للدين حنيفا فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها. So the deen, the right deen, the Haneef deen, is the deen al-fitrah. So yeah, I would say, yeah, definitely that's the way. Not to be trapped and completely submerged in those details of ahkam that have been borrowed from early scholars without understanding of the universals. And by the way, you know, every scholar of worth in our history was aware, whether he's faqih or mutakallim, of the importance of differentiating, understanding the relationship between the universal and the particular. Like to the extent like Ibn Taymiyyah, of course, Ibn Taymiyyah is seen like a literalist, which is he is not, of course. He said that anyone who does not understand the universals and distinguish them from the particular cannot be a faqih, cannot really try to solve problems of the Muslims, because he is more likely to err and come up with rules that are contrary to the Sharia.
Yes. Right. So, Professor Louay, so do you regard Malaysia? Can we in Malaysia? Can we term or regard Malaysia Madani as one of the fiqh maqasid, contemporary fiqh that can be applied with all the?
Maybe I don't understand the term you are using. Malaysia Madani. What do you mean by that?
All right. Have you read about Malaysia Madani that they be coined by our Prime Minister now?
I have not, unfortunately. Okay. I'm not aware of the terminology.
I think that's why I said I don't think I would be in the position to answer this, but I did mention this is all the more reason, Prof. You need to come to Malaysia.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm ready. I'm available. Just let me know.
You need to be attached with us.
I second Prof. Aslam, 200%.
And do a study on this and present, because I think you are the most qualified person to talk about this.
Indeed, yes.
Writing on this topic for a long time.
Wallahi, I agree, Prof. Aslam.
So, Brother Abdul Aziz, this I think has been a very fruitful session for ISTAC. So we should make sure that we bring Prof. Louay to us. Yeah.
Inshallah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, Brother Shahran, you had an early message, so just maybe you want to also, give your salams to.
Assalamualaikum, Prof. How are you?
Yeah, how are you? Good to see you.
Long time.
Yeah, it has been a while. Yeah.
Ya Allah.
How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
All right, Alhamdulillah, it is now 10:37. We have gone beyond 10:30. Really, on behalf of the organizers, the secretariat, I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone, especially Brother Louay, for joining us and presenting a very interesting session. I believe lots of food for thought, and I think especially in Malaysia at this moment. We are in a phase where, as mentioned by Brother Mohamed Azizan just now, there is a new framework given to govern Malaysia into the future, called Malaysia Madani. So it's an idea coined by our current Prime Minister to talk about a framework that would take multi-ethnic, multi-religious Malaysia, and many of the points you mentioned just now about the common good, plural society. I think these are the similar points that we're also trying to grapple with, and certainly your experience in Malaysia in the 90s would leave you in a very good position to understand where the current government maybe is trying to move forward. So we look forward to further sessions with you, and on behalf of the organizers for today, thanking everyone for joining us. Inshallah, we'll see you soon, everyone. Yeah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.